Close your eyes and let your mind drift back to a time when the world moved at a different pace, when candles flickered in stone chambers and the scent of herbs filled medieval air. Tonight we're traveling to the 14th century to explore one of history's most challenging periods through the gentle lens of human ingenuity and determination. This is another episode of Boring History for Sleep, where we transform the fascinating stories of our past into a soothing journey toward rest. Tonight's tale unfolds in medieval Europe, where people faced an invisible enemy with creativity, hope, and countless remedies that ranged from the logical to the utterly bizarre. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And let me know in the comments where you're tuning in from and what time it is for you. It's always fascinating to see who's joining us from around the world. Now dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. Get comfortable, close your eyes, and let the steady rhythm of ancient knowledge guide you into peaceful rest. So settle into your most comfortable position, let your breathing slow and deepen, and prepare to drift through the chronicles of how medieval people battled the Great Plague of the 14th century. The world is a tapestry of small kingdoms and city-states, connected by winding dirt roads and bustling trade routes. Ships with billowing sails carry not just goods and dreams, but also invisible passengers that would soon change the course of history. The plague, known to us now as the Black Death, arrived like a slow-moving shadow across Europe. But the people of the 14th century didn't understand germs or bacteria. They lived in a world where illness was often attributed to imbalances in the body's humours, the position of the stars, or divine displeasure. Imagine the stone walls of medieval cities, narrow cobblestone streets, where merchants called out their wares, and the constant sounds of craftsmen at work. Church bells marked the hours, and life followed rhythms set by sunrise and sunset. In this world, when the plague arrived, people responded with the knowledge and tools they had, creating a fascinating tapestry of attempted cures and preventive measures. The plague spread slowly at first, moving along trade routes like a patient traveler. From the bustling ports of Italy to the foggy shores of England, from the vineyards of France to the forests of Germany, communities found themselves facing this mysterious affliction with a mixture of fear and determination. One of the most widespread beliefs of the time was that disease traveled through miasma, corrupted air that carried illness from place to place. This wasn't entirely wrong, though the reasoning was different from what we understand today. People noticed that certain areas seemed more prone to disease, particularly places with stagnant water or unpleasant odors. Medieval physicians, learned men who studied ancient texts by candlelight, taught that bad air could penetrate the body through the pores and lungs. To combat this invisible threat, people developed elaborate strategies to purify the air around them. Picture a typical medieval home during plague times. Families would burn aromatic woods like juniper, rosemary, and thyme throughout their dwelling. The smoke would curl upward, filling rooms with fragrant clouds that were believed to drive away pestilent vapors. Windows were sealed shut, not to keep out fresh air, but to prevent the entrance of contaminated atmosphere. Wealthy households employed servants whose sole job was to tend these purifying fires, ensuring that sweet-smelling smoke continuously wafted through chambers and corridors. The scent of burning herbs became so associated with protection that even today we might find these aromas comforting and cleansing. Doctors carried special walking sticks with hollow tops filled with aromatic substances. They would lift these to their noses frequently, breathing in the protective vapors. Some physicians wore leather pouches filled with herbs around their necks, believing that the constant proximity to these purifying plants would create a barrier against disease. In public spaces, authorities ordered the burning of large bonfires in town squares and marketplaces. These community fires, fed with herbs and aromatic woods, were thought to cleanse the air for entire neighborhoods. Picture these scenes: townspeople gathering around crackling flames, the night sky filled with fragrant smoke, and the collective hope that their efforts would protect their communities. Medieval medicine, operated on fascinating principles that seem almost poetic to our modern mind. The doctrine of signatures suggested that plants which resembled parts of the human body could heal those same parts. A walnut, with its brain-like appearance, was thought to cure headache. Yellow flowers were used for liver ailments, and plants with heart-shaped leaves were prescribed for cardiac problems. For the plague, herbalists searched for plants that might hold the key to healing. They observed that certain herbs seemed to thrive in places where disease was less common, and they reasoned that these hardy plants might transfer their strength to human bodies. Imagine the medieval herbalist's workshop, a quiet room filled with hanging bundles of dried plants, shelves lined with ceramic jars containing powders and tinctures, and the constant, gentle sound of mortar and pestle grinding ingredients into healing potions. These dedicated individuals spent countless hours preparing remedies, their work guided by generations of accumulated wisdom. One popular remedy was theriac, a complex mixture that could contain dozens of ingredients. The preparation of theriac was an elaborate process that took months to complete. Herbs were harvested at specific times of day, dried according to precise methods, and combined in ratios that had been passed down through generations of healers. Picture an apothecary carefully measuring ingredients by candlelight: dried viper's flesh, ground pearls, herbs gathered under the full moon, and spices from distant lands. Each component was added with reverence and hope, as if the very act of preparation might imbue the mixture with healing power. People would travel great distances to obtain these carefully crafted remedies. Pilgrims would carry small vials of precious medicines, believing that the herbs blessed by holy men might provide divine protection against the plague. The wealthy employed personal physicians, who would create customized herbal treatments based on the patient's astrological chart and physical constitution. These learned men would spend hours consulting ancient texts, mixing ingredients in specific proportions, and timing the administration of medicines to align with celestial movement. Medieval medicine was built upon the ancient Greek theory of the four humours: blood, phlegm, yellow bile, and black bile. Physicians believed that illness resulted from an imbalance of these bodily fluids, and that restoring proper balance would cure disease. When the plague struck, many doctors reasoned that the disease was caused by an excess of corrupted blood in the body. The logical solution, in their minds, was to remove this tainted blood through careful bloodletting procedures. Picture a medieval physician's chamber, lit by oil lamps and warmed by a small fire. The doctor, dressed in long robes and wearing a serious expression, would examine his patient carefully before beginning the procedure. He might consult astrological charts to determine the most auspicious time for bloodletting, as the positions of the planets were thought to influence the effectiveness of medical treatments. The tools of bloodletting were varied and surprisingly sophisticated. Some physicians used sharp lancets to make precise cuts in veins, while others employed leeches, small, dark creatures that would attach themselves to the skin and draw out blood naturally. The use of leeches was considered gentler and more controlled than cutting, and many patients actually preferred this method. Cupping was another popular technique. Heated glass cups were placed on the skin, creating suction that would draw blood to the surface. As the cups cooled, they would pull at the skin, supposedly drawing out harmful humours. Patients would emerge from these sessions with circular marks on their backs and arms, worn almost like badges of their commitment to heal. Barber surgeons who combined haircutting with medical procedures were often the most accessible practitioners of bloodletting. Their shops were gathering places where people would discuss their ailments and share stories of successful treatment. The familiar red and white striped pole outside these establishments symbolized the blood and bandages of their medical practice. The amount of blood removed was carefully calculated based on the patient's age, constitution, and the phase of the moon. Some patients underwent regular bloodletting sessions, believing that maintaining proper humoral balance would prevent disease from taking hold. Physicians were often accomplished astronomers who spent long nights studying the stars and calculating planetary positions to better understand and treat disease. When the plague arrived, learned men immediately turned their attention to the heavens, searching for explanations in the cosmic dance above. They observed that the disease seemed to follow certain patterns, and reasoned that unusual planetary alignments might be responsible for the pestilence. Picture a medieval scholar in his tower study, surrounded by astrolabes, star charts, and carefully copied astronomical text. By the light of flickering candles, he would calculate the positions of planets at the time of disease outbreaks, looking for correlations that might reveal the cosmic causes of suffering. Mars, the red planet associated with war and conflict, was often blamed when disease struck community. Jupiter's position was thought to influence the body's natural defenses, while Saturn's heavy influence was believed to bring melancholy and weakness. The moon, with its obvious effects on tides and women's cycles, was considered particularly important in timing medical treatment. Physicians would create detailed birth charts for their patients, mapping the positions of planets at the moment of birth to understand individual susceptibility to disease. They believed that people born under certain planetary configurations were naturally more resistant to plague, while others required special precautions and treatments. Treatment timing was crucial in astrological medicine. Bloodletting was most effective when the moon was in certain phases. Herbal remedies were prepared during specific planetary hours, and even diet was adjusted according to celestial influence. A patient might be advised to avoid certain foods when Mars was prominent, or to consume extra amounts of cooling foods when the sun's influence was strong. Some communities employed professional astrologers whose sole job was to track celestial movements and advise local physicians on optimal treatment times. These learned individuals would calculate favorable moments for medical procedures, often working through the night to provide precise timing for treatments scheduled for the following day. The creation of astrological amulets became a thriving practice. Skilled craftsmen would engrave metal discs with planetary symbols and geometric patterns, timing the creation of these protective items to align with beneficial celestial configuration. People wore these amulets close to their skin, believing that the cosmic forces captured during their creation would provide ongoing protection against disease. In an age when faith and daily life were inseparably intertwined, many people naturally turned to religious solutions when faced with the plague. The Church taught that illness could be both a test of faith and a consequence of sin, leading to a wide variety of spiritual remedies and practices. Prayer became a constant companion for the many during plague times. Families would gather in their homes each evening, kneeling together as they recited traditional prayers and created new ones specific to their circumstances. The soft murmur of voices in dimly lit rooms, asking for protection and healing, became a familiar sound in plague-affected communities. Pilgrimage took on new urgency during the plague years. People would travel hundreds of miles to visit sacred sites, believing that the journey itself, combined with prayers offered at holy places, could provide divine protection. Picture these dedicated travelers walking along dusty roads, carrying simple provisions and wearing badges that identified their sacred destinations. Religious relics became particularly precious during plague time. Churches and monasteries that possessed fragments of saints' bones, pieces of the true cross, or other sacred objects found themselves hosting constant streams of visitors seeking healing. People would travel great distances just to touch or kiss these holy items, believing that direct contact with sacred objects could transfer protective power. The creation of religious art and illuminated manuscripts dedicated to plague saints became a form of both devotion and therapy. Monks and scribes would spend months creating beautiful depictions of Saint Roch, Saint Sebastian, and other saints associated with plague protection. The careful, meditative work of copying prayers and painting religious scenes provided both spiritual comfort and practical occupation during difficult times. Flagellant processions became a dramatic form of community religious response. Groups of penitents would move through towns, publicly demonstrating their faith through acts of self-discipline and prayer. These processions, while extreme, provided a sense of collective action and shared purpose that many found comforting during uncertain times. Churches began offering special masses and prayer services dedicated to plague relief. Congregations would gather in stone sanctuaries filled with the warm light of countless candles, their voices joining in ancient chants and hymns. The familiar rhythms of liturgical music and the comforting presence of community faith provided emotional strength that many found as valuable as any physical remedy. Medieval physicians believed that diet played a crucial role in maintaining the delicate balance of bodily humors, and during plague times, careful attention to food choices became a cornerstone of preventive medicine. The theory was elegant in its simplicity. By consuming the right combinations of foods, one could strengthen the body's natural defenses against disease. Foods were classified according to their inherent qualities: hot, cold, wet, or dry. Physicians would carefully prescribe dietary regimens that would counteract the humoral imbalances they believed caused plague susceptibility. A person deemed too hot and wet might be advised to consume cooling, drying foods, while someone with a cold, dry constitution would benefit from warming, moistening dishes. Picture a medieval kitchen during plague times, where careful attention was paid to every ingredient and cooking method. Spices were not just flavoring agents, but powerful medicines. Ginger, pepper, and cinnamon were prized for their warming properties, while cucumber and lettuce provided cooling effects. The preparation of meals became a deliberate act of health maintenance. Wealthy households employed cooks who were trained in medical dietary principles. These skilled individuals would create elaborate meal plans that changed with the seasons, the phases of the moon, and the current health status of family members. They might prepare warming broths during cold, wet weather, or cooling fruit preparations during hot, dry periods. Garlic emerged as one of the most popular dietary remedies for plague prevention. Its strong odor was believed to repel disease-carrying vapors, and its warming properties were thought to strengthen the body's internal heat. Families would consume large quantities of garlic, believing that the more pungent their breath, the more protected they were from infection. Wine, particularly when infused with herbs and spices, was considered both nutritious and medicinal. Physicians would prescribe specific wine preparations for different patients. Perhaps a warming red wine with ginger for someone with a cold constitution, or a lighter white wine with cooling herbs for those deemed too hot. The alcohol was thought to help preserve the medicinal properties of added herbs, while providing strengthening nutrition. Fasting and purification diets also played important roles in plague prevention strategies. Some physicians recommended regular fasting periods to cleanse the body of accumulated toxins and restore proper humoral balance. Communities might declare collective fasting days, believing that communal purification could protect entire populations from disease. The practice of fumigation, filling spaces with aromatic smoke and vapors, became one of the most widespread and elaborate plague prevention methods. People believed that pleasant, strong scents could literally drive away disease-carrying miasma, creating protective barriers around homes, businesses, and entire communities. Inside homes, fumigation became a daily ritual. Families would burn aromatic substances in special braziers or ceramic vessels, filling their living spaces with clouds of fragrant smoke. The choice of materials was often based on availability and tradition. Wealthy households might burn expensive imported spices, while peasant families used locally gathered herbs and resins. Picture a medieval home in the evening, filled with the gentle smoke of burning rosemary and lavender. The aromatic clouds would drift through rooms, settling into fabric and wooden furniture, creating an atmosphere that was both protective and comforting. Children would fall asleep breathing air, scented with herbs their parents believed would keep them safe through the night. Public fumigation became a community responsibility. Town authorities would organize large-scale burning of aromatic materials in market squares and public spaces. These events often took on a ceremonial quality, with citizens gathering to witness and participate in the collective protection of their community. Doctors and other professionals who came into contact with potentially infected individuals developed elaborate personal fumigation routines. They would burn incense in their clothing, carry aromatic substances in special containers, and even fumigate their medical instruments between patients. The famous plague doctor mask, with its long beak filled with aromatic substances, was the ultimate expression of this protective philosophy. Ships entering ports during plague times were subjected to fumigation procedures. Harbor authorities would burn aromatic materials on docks and sometimes even on the ships themselves, believing that thorough fumigation could cleanse vessels of any disease-carrying vapors they might have picked up during their voyages. Religious institutions incorporated fumigation into their spiritual practices. Churches would burn frankincense and other sacred aromatics not just for liturgical purposes, but as protection for congregations. Monasteries developed complex fumigation schedules, with different herbs burned at different times of day to maintain constant aromatic protection. The creation of portable fumigation devices became a specialized craft. Artisans would create small, decorative containers designed to hold smoldering aromatic materials. These could be carried in pockets or worn as pendants, providing personal protection wherever the wearer traveled. Medieval people developed fascinating and elaborate theories about how clothing and physical barriers could provide protection against plague. They believed that certain fabrics, colors, and styles could either attract or repel disease-carrying influences, leading to the development of specialized plague prevention garments. Silk was considered particularly protective because of its smooth surface and luxurious nature. Wealthy individuals would wear silk undergarments, believing that the fine fabric would prevent disease-carrying vapors from penetrating to their skin. The smooth texture was thought to offer less surface area for harmful miasma to cling to, while the material's association with luxury and purity was believed to provide spiritual protection as well. Color choices became medically significant during plague time. Dark colors, particularly black and deep blue, were often avoided because they were associated with melancholy and the influence of Saturn, the planet believed to promote disease. Instead, people preferred bright colors like red, which was associated with Mars and thought to promote strength and vitality, or white, which symbolized purity and divine protection. The covering of the head became particularly important in plague prevention strategy. People believed that the top of the head was especially vulnerable to disease-carrying vapors, leading to the development of elaborate head coverings and caps. These weren't just practical garments but carefully designed protective devices, often lined with aromatic herbs or blessed by religious authorities. Gloves took on new importance during plague times, not just for the wealthy but for anyone who might come into contact with potentially contaminated objects. Leather gloves were preferred because the material was thought to be naturally resistant to corruption, and they were often treated with aromatic oils or herbs to enhance their protective properties. The concept of protective layering became popular among those who could afford. People would wear multiple layers of clothing, believing that each layer provided additional protection against disease penetration. The outermost layer might be treated with aromatic substances, while inner layers were chosen for their purifying properties or sacred association. Shoes and foot coverings received special attention because people believed that disease could enter the body through the feet. Travelers would often carry multiple pairs of shoes, changing them frequently to avoid prolonged contact with potentially contaminated ground. Some individuals would sprinkle aromatic powders inside their shoes or attach small bundles of protective herbs to their footwear. The wealthy employed servants whose job was to maintain and prepare protective clothing. These individuals would be responsible for treating garments with aromatic substances, ensuring proper airing and fumigation of clothes, and selecting appropriate garments based on astrological calculations and current health conditions of family members. The practice of isolation during times of plague, while sometimes harsh, represented one of the most practical and ultimately effective approaches medieval people developed. Communities created elaborate systems for separating the sick from the healthy, though their understanding of disease transmission was quite different from ours. Lazarettas, specialized hospitals for plague victims, became features of many larger cities. These institutions were often built outside city walls, in locations chosen for their exposure to purifying winds and distance from population centers. Picture these stone buildings set in open fields, with gardens of medicinal herbs and staff dedicated to providing care while maintaining protective barriers. Wealthy families often maintained separate buildings on their properties specifically for isolation purposes. These pest houses were furnished with everything necessary for extended stays: beds, cooking facilities, and storage for food and medicine. Family members who showed signs of illness would move to these separate dwellings, where they could receive care while protecting others from potential infection. The practice of house quarantine became formalized in many communities, with authorities marking affected homes with distinctive signs or symbols. These markings served both as warnings to passers-by and as indicators to delivery personnel who would leave food and supplies at safe distances. The sight of these marked houses became a familiar part of the urban landscape during plague times. Ships arriving at ports were subjected to quarantine periods that could last weeks or even months. Harbor authorities would require vessels to anchor at designated distances from shore, with communication conducted through pre-arranged signal. Crews would wait aboard their ships, maintaining themselves with preserved foods and rainwater, until authorities determined it was safe for them to enter port. Religious communities developed their own isolation protocol. Monasteries would designate specific areas for caring for sick members, often with separate entrances and facilities that allowed caregivers to tend to patients without exposing the rest of the community. These arrangements required careful planning and dedicated individuals willing to risk their own health to care for others. The concept of protective distance became codified in various community regulations. People were advised to maintain specific distances from others when in public spaces, and gathering sizes were limited to reduce the risk of disease transmission. Markets and other commercial activities were restructured to minimize close contact while still allowing necessary trade to continue. Medieval theories about bathing and cleanliness during plague times were complex and sometimes contradictory, reflecting the era's understanding of how disease moved through community. While some believed that water could carry disease, others saw specific types of bathing as protective and purifying. The theory of pore closure became particularly important during plague time. Many physicians believed that hot baths opened the pores of the skin, making the body more vulnerable to disease-carrying vapors. This led to recommendations against frequent bathing, particularly in hot water during periods when plague was active in a community. However, certain types of bathing were considered beneficial and protective. Cold water baths were thought to close the pores and strengthen the body's natural defense. Picture individuals braving cold streams or basins of well water, believing that the shock of cold water would fortify their bodies against disease. These bathing sessions were often accompanied by prayers or meditation, combining physical and spiritual purification. Religious institutions incorporated fumigation into their spiritual practices. Churches would burn frankincense and other sacred aromatics not just for liturgical purposes, but as protection for congregations. Monasteries developed complex fumigation schedules, with different herbs burned at different times of day to maintain constant aromatic protection. The creation of portable fumigation devices became a specialized craft. Artisans would create small, decorative containers designed to hold smoldering aromatic materials. These could be carried in pockets or worn as pendants, providing personal protection wherever the wearer traveled. Medieval people developed fascinating and elaborate theories about how clothing and physical barriers could provide protection against plague. They believed that certain fabrics, colors, and styles could either attract or repel disease-carrying influences, leading to the development of specialized plague prevention garments. Silk was considered particularly protective because of its smooth surface and luxurious nature. Wealthy individuals would wear silk undergarments, believing that the fine fabric would prevent disease-carrying vapors from penetrating to their skin. The smooth texture was thought to offer less surface area for harmful miasma to cling to, while the material's association with luxury and purity was believed to provide spiritual protection as well. Color choices became medically significant during plague time. Dark colors, particularly black and deep blue, were often avoided because they were associated with melancholy and the influence of Saturn, the planet believed to promote disease. Instead, people preferred bright colors like red, which was associated with Mars and thought to promote strength and vitality, or white, which symbolized purity and divine protection. The covering of the head became particularly important in plague prevention strategy. People believed that the top of the head was especially vulnerable to disease-carrying vapors, leading to the development of elaborate head coverings and caps. These weren't just practical garments but carefully designed protective devices, often lined with aromatic herbs or blessed by religious authorities. Gloves took on new importance during plague times, not just for the wealthy but for anyone who might come into contact with potentially contaminated objects. Leather gloves were preferred because the material was thought to be naturally resistant to corruption, and they were often treated with aromatic oils or herbs to enhance their protective properties. The concept of protective layering became popular among those who could afford. People would wear multiple layers of clothing, believing that each layer provided additional protection against disease penetration. The outermost layer might be treated with aromatic substances, while inner layers were chosen for their purifying properties or sacred association. Shoes and foot coverings received special attention because people believed that disease could enter the body through the feet. Travelers would often carry multiple pairs of shoes, changing them frequently to avoid prolonged contact with potentially contaminated ground. Some individuals would sprinkle aromatic powders inside their shoes or attach small bundles of protective herbs to their footwear. The wealthy employed servants whose job was to maintain and prepare protective clothing. These individuals would be responsible for treating garments with aromatic substances, ensuring proper airing and fumigation of clothes, and selecting appropriate garments based on astrological calculations and current health conditions of family members. The practice of isolation during times of plague, while sometimes harsh, represented one of the most practical and ultimately effective approaches medieval people developed. Communities created elaborate systems for separating the sick from the healthy, though their understanding of disease transmission was quite different from ours. Lazarettas, specialized hospitals for plague victims, became features of many larger cities. These institutions were often built outside city walls, in locations chosen for their exposure to purifying winds and distance from population centers. Picture these stone buildings set in open fields, with gardens of medicinal herbs and staff dedicated to providing care while maintaining protective barriers. Wealthy families often maintained separate buildings on their properties specifically for isolation purposes. These pest houses were furnished with everything necessary for extended stays, beds, cooking facilities, and storage for food and medicine. Family members who showed signs of illness would move to these separate dwellings, where they could receive care while protecting others from potential infection. The practice of house quarantine became formalized in many communities, with authorities marking affected homes with distinctive signs or symbols. These markings served both as warnings to passers-by and as indicators to delivery personnel who would leave food and supplies at safe distances. The sight of these marked houses became a familiar part of the urban landscape during plague times. Ships arriving at ports were subjected to quarantine periods that could last weeks or even months. Harbor authorities would require vessels to anchor at designated distances from shore, with communication conducted through pre-arranged signals. Crews would wait aboard their ships, maintaining themselves with preserved foods and rainwater, until authorities determined it was safe for them to enter port. Religious communities developed their own isolation protocol. Monasteries would designate specific areas for caring for sick members, often with separate entrances and facilities that allowed caregivers to tend to patients without exposing the rest of the community. These arrangements required careful planning and dedicated individuals willing to risk their own health to care for others. The concept of protective distance became codified in various community regulations. People were advised to maintain specific distances from others when in public spaces, and gathering sizes were limited to reduce the risk of disease transmission. Markets and other commercial activities were restructured to minimize close contact while still allowing necessary trade to continue. Medieval theories about bathing and cleanliness during plague times were complex and sometimes contradictory, reflecting the era's understanding of how disease moved through community. While some believed that water could carry disease, others saw specific types of bathing as protective and purifying. The theory of pore closure became particularly important during plague time. Many physicians believed that hot baths opened the pores of the skin, making the body more vulnerable to disease-carrying vapors. This led to recommendations against frequent bathing, particularly in hot water during periods when plague was active in a community. However, certain types of bathing were considered beneficial and protective. Cold water baths were thought to close the pores and strengthen the body's natural defense. Picture individuals braving cold streams or basins of well water, believing that the shock of cold water would fortify their bodies against disease. These bathing sessions were often accompanied by prayers or meditation, combining physical and spiritual purification. Herbal baths became popular among those who could afford them. Bathhouses would prepare special baths infused with aromatic herbs, believed to have protective properties. Rosemary, thyme, and lavender were popular choices, creating bath experiences that were both pleasant and medically purposeful. The warm, scented water was thought to cleanse the body, while the herbs provided protection against disease. The wealthy often employed bath attendants who specialized in preparing medicinal baths. These skilled individuals would select appropriate herbs based on the bather's constitution and current health status, timing the baths according to astrological calculations and adjusting water temperature to achieve optimal therapeutic effect. Public bathhouses, which had been popular in many medieval cities, faced new challenges during plague times. Some communities closed them entirely, fearing that shared water could spread disease. Others implemented elaborate purification procedures, changing water frequently and adding large quantities of aromatic herbs to provide protective effects for bathers. The practice of dry cleaning became more popular during plague period. People would use cloths and brushes to clean their bodies without water, often incorporating aromatic powders and herbs into the cleaning process. This method was believed to remove surface contamination while avoiding the risks associated with water exposure. Foot washing received special attention because people believed that disease could enter the body through the feet. Many individuals developed elaborate foot cleaning rituals, using special herbs and aromatic waters to cleanse their feet after traveling through potentially contaminated areas. These practices often took on religious significance as well, connecting physical cleanliness with spiritual purification. Physicians developed precise methods for removing blood from different parts of the body, believing that the location and timing of bloodletting could significantly affect its therapeutic value. Cupping became one of the most refined bloodletting techniques. Practitioners would heat glass or ceramic cups and place them on the skin, creating suction as they cooled. The resulting suction would draw blood to the surface, sometimes combined with small incisions to allow actual blood removal. Picture a patient lying peacefully while a skilled practitioner carefully placed warm cups along their back and arms, the glass vessels creating perfect circular seals against the skin. Scarification, the practice of making small, shallow cuts in the skin, was often combined with cupping to enhance blood removal. Practitioners used specialized tools with multiple small blades that could create several uniform incisions simultaneously. The cuts were typically made in patterns that practitioners believed would optimize the therapeutic effects of blood removal. Leech therapy developed into a precise medical science during plague times. Different species of leeches were used for different purposes, and practitioners maintained detailed knowledge about which types of leeches were most effective for specific conditions. The leeches were carefully stored in special containers and applied to precise locations on the body according to medical theories about optimal blood removal points. Astrological timing became crucial in bloodletting practice. Physicians would consult detailed charts to determine the most favorable times for blood removal, considering the positions of planets, phases of the moon, and the patient's astrological birth chart. A bloodletting session might be delayed for days or weeks until celestial conditions were deemed optimal. The amount of blood removed was calculated according to complex formulas that considered the patient's age, constitution, current health status, and astrological influence. Practitioners used specialized measuring containers to ensure precise quantities were removed, and they maintained detailed records of each session to track the patient's progress and determine optimal treatment schedules. Dietary preparation for bloodletting became an important part of the treatment process. Patients would follow specific dietary regimens before and after blood removal, consuming foods thought to replace the beneficial aspects of removed blood, while avoiding substances that might interfere with the treatment's effectiveness. The practice of inhaling aromatic smoke from medicinal herbs became one of the most widespread and socially accepted plague prevention methods. People believed that breathing herb-infused smoke could cleanse the lungs and respiratory system while providing protection against disease-carrying vapors. Specialized smoking mixtures were developed by herbalists and physicians who combined various aromatic plants according to their understanding of each herb's protective properties. These mixtures often included rosemary for purification, thyme for strength, lavender for calm protection, and sage for wisdom and cleansing. The careful blending of these herbs was considered both an art and a science. Picture a medieval workshop where an herbalist carefully measured and mixed dried herbs, creating personalized smoking blends for different customers. The workshop would be filled with the gentle rustling of dried plants and the subtle fragrances of numerous herbs hanging from the rafters. Each mixture was created with specific intentions, and often blessed or prepared according to astrological timing. Pipe smoking, though not yet involving tobacco, became popular using these medicinal herbs. Craftsmen created specialized pipes from clay, wood, or even precious metals, designed specifically for inhaling therapeutic smoke. These pipes often featured decorative elements believed to enhance their protective properties, religious symbols, astrological signs, or geometric patterns, thought to channel beneficial influence. Community smoking sessions became social events where neighbors would gather to share protective smoke and discuss health strategies. These gatherings often took place in courtyards or gardens, with participants sitting in circles around braziers filled with smoldering herb. The shared experience of breathing protective smoke created bonds of mutual support and collective hope. Religious institutions incorporated herbal smoking into their spiritual practice. Monasteries would schedule specific times for communal inhalation of sacred smoke, often combining this practice with prayer and meditation. The smoke was believed to carry prayers upward while providing physical protection to the community. Some practitioners developed portable smoking devices that could be carried and used throughout the day. These might be small braziers with long handles, or personal incense burners designed to provide continuous aromatic protection. Wealthy individuals might employ servants whose job was to maintain these devices and ensure constant access to protective smoke. The timing of smoking sessions was often coordinated with daily activities and astrological influence. People might smoke protective herbs upon waking, before meals, after contact with strangers, and before sleep. The rhythm of these sessions became part of the daily routine, providing both physical protection and psychological comfort. The creation and use of protective amulets reached remarkable sophistication during plague times, as craftsmen, physicians, and religious authorities collaborated to create objects believed to provide powerful protection against disease. These items combined practical materials with symbolic designs, astronomical timing, and spiritual blessing. Gemstone amulets were particularly prized for their supposed protective properties. Different stones were associated with different types of protection: garnets for strength and vitality, sapphires for divine favor, and emeralds for healing and renewal. Skilled jewelers would carefully select stones based on their clarity, color, and astrological associations, often timing the cutting and setting of these gems to align with favorable celestial configuration. Metal amulets incorporated complex symbolic designs that were believed to channel protective influences. These might include geometric patterns based on sacred mathematics, astrological symbols representing beneficial planetary influences, or religious imagery invoking divine protection. The metals themselves were chosen for their symbolic properties: silver for lunar protection, gold for solar strength, and copper for Venus's healing influence. Herbal amulets contained carefully selected plant materials sewn into small fabric pouches that could be worn close to the body. The herbs were often gathered at specific times according to astrological calculations, dried using traditional methods, and blessed by religious authorities. Common protective herbs included angelica for divine protection, rue for purification, and vervain for general healing. The creation of personalized amulets became a specialized craft that combined medical knowledge, astrological calculation, and artistic skill. Craftsmen would consult with physicians and astrologers to create amulets tailored to individual needs, taking into account the person's birth chart, current health status, and specific concerns about plague exposure. Written amulets featured prayers, incantations, or magical formulas inscribed on parchment or metal plates. These texts might be written in Latin for religious protection, Hebrew for traditional magical purposes, or symbolic languages that were believed to have special power. The writing itself was often done with special inks made from protective herbs or precious materials. Composite amulets combined multiple protective elements in single objects. These might include gemstones, metal symbols, herbal materials, and written prayers, all incorporated into elaborate designs. The creation of these complex amulets required collaboration between different specialists and could take weeks or months to complete. The wearing and care of protective amulets became ritualized practices with specific rules about placement, timing, and maintenance. Some amulets needed to be worn against the skin, others over clothing. Some required regular cleansing or re-blessing, while others were never to be removed once put on. These food taboos were often complex, taking into account not just the type of food but also its preparation, timing of consumption, and combination with other foods. Fruit consumption became particularly regulated during plague time. Many physicians believed that fresh fruits, especially those with high water content, could introduce corrupt moisture into the body and upset the careful balance of humors. Apples, pears, and stone fruits were often forbidden, while dried fruits that had been preserved with honey or wine were considered safer alternatives. The consumption of dairy products was heavily restricted based on theories about their cooling and moistening properties. Fresh milk was often prohibited because it was believed to increase phlegm production and create internal conditions favorable to disease. However, aged cheeses were sometimes recommended because the aging process was thought to transform their harmful properties into beneficial ones. Meat consumption followed complex rules based on the animal's nature and living conditions. Pork was often avoided because pigs were considered naturally corrupt and prone to disease. Wild game was preferred over domestic animals, because wild creatures were believed to possess stronger vital forces that could transfer to those who consumed them. The method of preparation was also crucial. Roasted meats were preferred over boiled because roasting was thought to concentrate and purify the animal's beneficial properties. Water consumption became a matter of serious medical concern. Physicians warned against drinking water from stagnant sources or areas where disease had been reported. Instead, people were encouraged to consume wine, ale, or water that had been boiled with aromatic herbs. The addition of wine to water was believed to neutralize harmful properties, while adding beneficial warming effect. Spice consumption was generally encouraged because most spices were believed to have warming, drying properties that could counteract the cold, moist conditions thought to promote disease. However, the timing and combination of spices required careful consideration. Ginger might be recommended in the morning for its warming properties, while cooling spices like coriander might be preferred in the evening. The concept of food combining became medically significant during plague time. Certain food combinations were thought to create beneficial effects, while others could produce harmful results. Physicians would create detailed dietary charts showing which foods could be safely combined and which combinations should be avoided. Fasting practices were often recommended as both preventive and therapeutic measures. Regular fasting was believed to purge the body of accumulated toxins and restore proper humoral balance. Community fasting days were sometimes declared during plague outbreaks, with entire populations participating in collective purification efforts. Medieval understanding of exercise during plague times was based on the belief that proper movement could regulate the body's humors and strengthen natural defenses against disease. However, the type, timing, and intensity of exercise required careful consideration to avoid creating conditions that might increase susceptibility to illness. Gentle walking was considered one of the safest and most beneficial forms of exercise during plague times. Physicians recommended regular walks in gardens or areas with fresh air, believing that moderate movement combined with breathing clean air could help maintain proper circulation of bodily fluids. Picture individuals taking slow, deliberate walks through herb gardens, breathing deeply of aromatic plants while maintaining the gentle movement that physicians believed promoted health. The timing of exercise was considered crucial for its therapeutic benefits. Early morning movement was often recommended because the air was thought to be purest at dawn, before the day's activities could corrupt the atmosphere. Evening exercise was sometimes discouraged, because night air was believed to be more likely to carry disease-causing vapors. Dancing, particularly in forms that involved rhythmic breathing and moderate exertion, was sometimes prescribed as therapeutic exercise. However, vigorous dancing that caused excessive sweating was often discouraged because perspiration was thought to open the pores and make the body more vulnerable to disease penetration. The social aspects of group dancing were weighed against the risks of close contact with others. Breathing exercises became increasingly popular as people sought ways to strengthen their lungs against disease. These practices often combined physical movement with controlled breathing patterns, sometimes incorporating the inhalation of aromatic smoke or vapor. Practitioners would spend time each day focusing on deep, deliberate breathing while visualizing the expulsion of harmful vapors from their bodies. Stretching and flexibility exercises, often derived from monastic traditions, were adapted for plague prevention. These gentle movements were believed to promote proper circulation of humors throughout the body, while avoiding the risks associated with more vigorous exercise. The meditative aspects of these practices provided both physical and mental benefits during stressful times. Work-related movement was carefully regulated during plague periods. Physical laborers were advised to moderate their exertion and take frequent breaks to avoid excessive sweating and fatigue. Sedentary workers were encouraged to incorporate regular movement into their daily routines to prevent stagnation of bodily fluids that might create conditions favorable to disease. Medieval physicians developed detailed theories about how proper sleep and rest could protect against plague, while improper sleep habits might increase vulnerability to disease. These recommendations encompassed not just the amount of sleep but also sleeping positions, bedroom conditions, and pre-sleep rituals. The timing of sleep was considered medically significant, with physicians recommending specific sleep schedules based on astrological influences and humoral theory. Most practitioners advised going to bed shortly after sunset and rising with dawn, believing that aligning sleep patterns with natural light cycles would maintain proper bodily balance. The hours of deepest sleep were thought to be most restorative when they occurred during the darkest part of the night. Sleeping position received careful medical attention during plague times. Many physicians recommended sleeping with the head elevated to prevent the accumulation of harmful vapors in the brain and respiratory system. Some suggested sleeping on the right side to promote proper digestion and humoral circulation, while others recommended alternating positions throughout the night to ensure balanced rest. Bedroom environments were modified specifically for plague protection. Windows were often sealed or covered to prevent the entry of corrupted night air, while aromatic substances were burned regularly to maintain protective atmosphere. The bedroom might be fumigated each evening before sleep, filling the space with fragrant smoke that was believed to provide protection throughout the night. Bedding materials were chosen for their supposed protective property. Linen sheets were preferred over other fabrics because linen was believed to be naturally purifying and resistant to corruption. Pillows might be stuffed with aromatic herbs like lavender or rosemary, providing gentle, continuous inhalation of protective vapors throughout the night. Pre-sleep rituals became elaborate during plague times, combining physical preparation with spiritual practices. People might spend time each evening in prayer or meditation, asking for protection during the vulnerable hours of sleep. Some would recite specific prayers or incantations believed to create protective barriers around the sleeping area. The concept of dream protection became important in plague prevention theories. Some people believed that harmful influences could attack the body through dreams, leading to practices designed to promote beneficial dreams while preventing nightmares or disturbing vision. Protective amulets might be placed under pillows or special herbs burned to influence the content of dreams. Shared sleeping arrangements were modified during plague times to balance the benefits of companionship with concerns about disease transmission. Family members might continue to share sleeping spaces while maintaining specific distances or barriers, using separate bedding while remaining close enough to provide mutual comfort and support. Medieval communities developed elaborate collective rituals and responses to plague that demonstrated their shared commitment to protection and mutual support. These community-wide efforts reflected the belief that collective action could be more powerful than individual efforts in combating disease. Processional rituals became common community responses to plague outbreaks. Entire populations would participate in slow, solemn processions through their towns and cities, carrying religious relics, burning aromatic substances, and reciting prayers for protection. Picture these moving ceremonies: hundreds of people walking together through narrow streets, their voices joining in ancient chants while fragrant smoke rises from censers and braziers carried throughout the procession. Community fumigation efforts involved coordinated burning of aromatic materials throughout entire neighborhoods. Residents would simultaneously light fires in their homes, courtyards, and public spaces, creating vast clouds of protective smoke that would blanket entire districts. These events often took on festival-like qualities, with people gathering to share aromatic materials and coordinate their efforts. Collective fasting and purification events brought communities together in shared spiritual preparation. Entire towns might declare days of fasting and prayer, with residents participating in communal meals designed to restore proper humoral balance. These events combined practical dietary intervention with spiritual unity, creating powerful bonds of mutual support. Bell-ringing campaigns were organized to create protective sound barriers around communities. Church bells, handbells, and other noise-making instruments would be rung at specific times throughout the day, based on beliefs that certain sounds could dispel disease-carrying vapor. The coordinated ringing created acoustic environments that residents believed provided continuous protection. Market and trade modifications reflected community-wide commitment to plague prevention. Merchants would coordinate their activities to minimize disease transmission, while maintaining necessary commerce. Market days might be rescheduled to align with favorable astrological conditions, and trading practices were modified to reduce close contact, while still allowing essential exchanges. Community gardens dedicated to medicinal herbs became collaborative efforts to ensure adequate supplies of protective plants. Residents would work together to cultivate, harvest, and process herbs needed for community-wide protection efforts. These gardens served both practical and social functions, providing gathering places where people could share knowledge and support each other. Collective prayer and meditation sessions brought communities together for spiritual protection. These gatherings might take place in churches, public squares, or natural settings, with participants joining their voices and intentions in requests for divine intervention and protection. The shared spiritual experience provided emotional comfort, while residents believed it created powerful protective effects. Medieval commerce adapted in fascinating ways to accommodate plague prevention theories, creating new trade practices and economic relationships that balanced the need for continued exchange with concerns about disease transmission. These adaptations reveal the practical creativity of medieval merchants and their customers. Distance trading became highly refined during plague times, with merchants developing elaborate systems for conducting business while maintaining physical separation. Goods might be displayed at specific distances, with negotiations conducted through intermediaries or shouted conversations across predetermined spaces. Payment methods were adapted to minimize direct contact, with coins often left in one location for later collection. Fumigation of goods became standard practice in many trading relationships. Merchants would treat their wares with aromatic substances before transport and display, believing that proper treatment could cleanse goods of any disease-carrying influences they might have acquired. Textiles might be aired and treated with herbs, while metal goods were often polished with aromatic oils. Seasonal trading patterns were modified to align with plague prevention theories. Some merchants would time their activities to coincide with astrological conditions, believed to be favorable for safe commerce. Trading expeditions might be delayed for weeks or months, until celestial influences were deemed appropriate for travel and exchange. Storage and warehouse practices incorporated plague prevention measures that affected how goods were handled and distributed. Warehouses might be regularly fumigated, goods rotated according to medical theories about contamination, and storage areas arranged to promote air circulation that was believed to prevent the accumulation of harmful vapor. Payment and monetary exchange developed new practices to reduce disease transmission risks. Some communities created systems where money was left in designated locations for specific periods, allowing time for any harmful influences to dissipate before collection. Precious metals were sometimes heated or treated with aromatic substances as purification measures. Guild regulations incorporated plague prevention measures that affected how craftsmen and merchants conducted their business. Professional organizations might establish rules about workspace fumigation, material handling, and customer interaction that reflected current medical theories about disease prevention, while maintaining the quality and continuity of trade. International trade networks developed communication systems that allowed merchants to share information about plague conditions in different regions. This intelligence network helped merchants make informed decisions about travel routes, timing, and risk assessment, while maintaining the commercial relationships that were essential for economic survival. Medieval architecture and environmental design were modified in response to plague prevention theories, creating physical spaces that people believed would provide protection while maintaining the functionality necessary for daily life. These modifications reflect the era's understanding of how disease moved through environments. Window and ventilation modifications became common in plague-affected areas. Some buildings had windows sealed or reduced in size to prevent the entry of corrupted air, while others were modified to promote specific types of air circulation believed to be beneficial. Architects and builders developed new approaches to managing airflow that balanced protection concerns with the need for livable spaces. Courtyard and garden designs incorporated plants and features specifically chosen for their supposed protective property. Herb gardens were positioned to provide aromatic protection for buildings, while water features were designed to promote air purification. Picture peaceful courtyards filled with fragrant plants, where residents could breathe air naturally scented with protective herbs, while enjoying outdoor spaces designed for both beauty and health. Building materials were sometimes chosen or treated based on plague prevention theory. Stone was often preferred over wood because it was believed to be less susceptible to corruption, while wooden structures might be treated with aromatic oils or substances thought to provide protection. Interior surfaces were sometimes painted or treated with materials believed to resist disease-carrying influences. Room layouts and interior arrangements were modified to promote healthful living, according to medieval medical theories. Sleeping areas might be positioned to avoid certain directional influences, while cooking and eating areas were arranged to promote proper digestion and humoral balance. The flow of daily activities through buildings was sometimes redesigned to align with medical recommendations. Community spaces were redesigned to accommodate social needs, while providing protection against disease transmission. Public buildings might be modified to allow for greater distances between occupants, while still serving their essential function. Churches, markets, and meeting halls developed new arrangements that balanced community needs with health concerns. Waste management and sanitation systems were improved in many communities as part of comprehensive plague prevention efforts. These improvements reflected the understanding that certain environmental conditions might promote disease, leading to better systems for managing refuse water and other potential sources of contamination. Defensive architecture sometimes incorporated plague prevention features, with city walls and gates designed to include fumigation areas or quarantine facilities. These modifications allowed communities to maintain security while implementing health measures for travelers and goods entering their territories. Medieval plague prevention developed sophisticated seasonal approaches based on the belief that different times of year required different protective strategies. These calendar-based methods reflected observations about disease patterns, combined with astrological and humoral theories about how seasonal changes affected human health. Spring prevention focused on addressing the seasonal increase in moisture and the rebalancing of humors after winter. Physicians recommended specific dietary changes to counteract spring's wet, warming influences, often prescribing drying foods and herbs to maintain proper humoral balance. Communities might organize collective cleansing rituals to purge winter's accumulated toxins and prepare for the more active months ahead. Summer protection strategies emphasize cooling and drying measures to counteract the season's hot, moist influences that were believed to promote disease. People would modify their daily routines to avoid the hottest parts of the day, seek shaded and ventilated spaces, and consume foods with cooling properties. Aromatic fumigation was often increased during summer months when stagnant air was thought to be most dangerous. Autumn preparations involved strengthening the body for winter, while addressing the seasonal increase in melancholy associated with shortening days. This season was often considered ideal for certain medical treatments, including bloodletting and herbal remedies designed to restore balance before winter's challenges. Communities might organize harvest festivals that combined Thanksgiving with collective health rituals. Winter prevention focused on maintaining internal warmth and preventing the accumulation of cold, moist humors that could make the body susceptible to disease. Heating and warming strategies became medically significant, with specific recommendations about maintaining body temperature through diet, clothing, and environmental modifications. Indoor fumigation was often increased during winter months when people spent more time in enclosed spaces. Astrological timing influenced seasonal prevention strategies, with specific months and periods considered more or less favorable for various protective measures. Medical treatments, dietary changes, and even social activities might be timed to align with favorable celestial influence. Communities would consult learned astronomers to determine optimal timing for collective prevention efforts. Holiday and festival modifications incorporated plague prevention measures, while maintaining important social and religious observance. Traditional celebrations might be adapted to include protective rituals, aromatic elements, or other health measures that aligned with current prevention theories, while preserving cultural continuity. Agricultural cycles were sometimes coordinated with plague prevention efforts, with planting and harvesting times adjusted to optimize the cultivation of medicinal plants. Communities would ensure adequate supplies of protective herbs by coordinating growing seasons with their prevention needs, creating sustainable systems for maintaining health resources. Medieval approaches to water and liquid medicines during plague times reflected complex theories about how different types of liquids could either promote health or increase disease susceptibility. These beliefs led to elaborate systems for preparing, purifying, and consuming various liquids for protective purposes. Water purification became a sophisticated practice during plague times, with multiple methods developed for removing harmful influences from drinking water. Boiling water with aromatic herbs was one common approach, with different herbs chosen for their specific protective properties. The resulting infusions served dual purposes, as both purified water and herbal medicine. Wine-based medicines became particularly popular because wine was believed to have natural preservative and strengthening properties. Physicians would create elaborate wine preparations by infusing different herbs and spices for specific protective effects. These medicinal wines were often aged for months or years, with the aging process believed to enhance their therapeutic value. Distillation techniques, though still primitive by modern standards, were employed to create concentrated liquid medicine. Distilled waters infused with aromatic plants were thought to capture the essential protective properties of herbs in highly concentrated forms. These preparations were often considered more potent than simple infusions or decoctions. Honey-based preparations combined the preservative properties of honey with various medicinal herbs to create syrups and electrories that could be stored for extended periods. These sweet preparations were particularly popular for children and those who found bitter herbal medicines difficult to consume. The honey was believed to enhance the absorption and effectiveness of herbal ingredients. Oil-based preparations served both internal and external medicinal purposes during plague prevention efforts. Aromatic oils were used for massage, added to bath water, and sometimes consumed in small quantities. The preparation of these oils often involved lengthy processes of heating herbs in olive oil or other bases to extract their protective essence. Milk and dairy-based preparations were used selectively, with careful attention to their humoral properties and potential effects on individual constitution. While fresh milk was often avoided, cultured dairy products like kefir or aged cheese preparations were sometimes incorporated into medical regimens for their supposed beneficial effects on digestion and humoral balance. Herbal tea preparations became daily rituals for many people during plague times, with specific blends created for different times of day and different protective purposes. Morning teas might emphasize warming and energizing herbs, while evening preparations focused on calming and protective plants that could provide benefits during sleep. Medieval understanding of music and sound as healing forces led to the development of specific audio therapies designed to provide protection against plague and promote recovery from illness. These practices reflected beliefs about how different sounds could influence bodily humors and spiritual well-being. Church music and sacred chanting were believed to provide both spiritual protection and physical healing benefit. Communities would organize extended prayer sessions featuring specific musical compositions thought to have protective property. Picture congregations gathered in stone sanctuaries, their voices joining in ancient melodies that were believed to create acoustic barriers against disease, while providing comfort and spiritual strength. Bell therapy became widespread during plague times, with different types of bells believed to have specific protective effects. Church bells were rung at designated times to cleanse the air of harmful influences, while smaller bells were sometimes worn as personal protective devices. The metallic resonance was thought to shatter disease-carrying vapors and create protective sound environment. Instrumental music therapy incorporated specific instruments and compositions believed to promote healing and protection. String instruments like lutes and harps were often preferred for their gentle, harmonious sounds that were thought to restore proper balance to disturbed humors. Wind instruments might be used with aromatic substances, combining sound therapy with fumigation practices. Vocal exercises and breathing techniques combined musical practice with respiratory therapy. Singers would practice specific scales and breathing patterns believed to strengthen the lungs and throat against disease. These exercises often incorporated the inhalation of aromatic vapors, creating comprehensive treatments that addressed multiple aspects of plague prevention. Rhythm and percussion therapies used drums and other percussion instruments to create specific rhythmic patterns believed to have healing properties. These rhythms might be synchronized with natural cycles like heartbeat or breathing, creating therapeutic experiences that addressed both physical and emotional aspects of health maintenance. Community singing events brought people together for collective sound therapy. While maintaining safe distances, these gatherings allowed communities to share the emotional benefits of music while participating in activities believed to provide mutual protection. The shared musical experience created bonds of support, while delivering what people believed were tangible health benefits. Lullabies and sleep-inducing music were specifically composed or adapted for plague times, incorporating melodies and rhythms believed to promote restful sleep and peaceful dreams. Parents would sing these protective songs to their children, believing that the music could provide both comfort and actual protection during the vulnerable hours of sleep. Medieval textile practices during plague times incorporated elaborate theories about how different fabrics, dyes, and textile treatments could provide protection against disease. These approaches reflected beliefs about the protective properties of various materials and the ways in which clothing could serve as barriers against harmful influences. Fabric selection became medically significant during plague prevention efforts. Linen was highly prized for its smooth texture and association with purity, While wool was sometimes avoided because its fibrous nature was thought to trap harmful vapors, silk, when available, was considered ideal because of its luxurious nature and supposed resistance to corruption. Dyeing practices incorporated medicinal plants and protective substances into textile production. Fabrics might be dyed with herbs like madder, woad, or saffron, not just for color but for the protective properties these plants were believed to impart to the finished cloth. The dyeing process itself was sometimes timed according to astrological calculations to enhance protective effects. Textile treatments with aromatic substances became standard practice for clothing intended to provide plague protection. Finished garments might be stored with sachets of protective herbs, treated with aromatic oils, or subjected to fumigation processes designed to imbue them with protective properties. These treatments required regular renewal to maintain their supposed effective. Embroidery and decorative work incorporated protective symbols and patterns, believed to enhance the defensive properties of clothing. Religious symbols, astrological signs, and geometric patterns thought to have protective power were carefully stitched into garments. The act of creating these protective decorations was itself considered a form of meditation and spiritual practice. Bedding and household textiles received special attention during plague time. Sheets, blankets, and curtains were chosen and treated according to medical theories about their potential effects on health. Bedding might be stuffed with aromatic herbs, while curtains were positioned to control airflow according to current medical understanding. Cleaning and maintenance of textiles incorporated plague prevention theories about how fabrics could become contaminated and how they could be safely cleansed. Washing practices might include the use of aromatic herbs, specific timing based on lunar cycles, and drying methods designed to expose fabrics to purifying influences like sunlight and fresh air. Protective clothing accessories included items like gloves, scarves, and head coverings specifically designed for plague prevention. These accessories were often made from multiple layers of different fabrics, treated with protective substances, and decorated with symbols believed to enhance their defensive property. Medieval understanding of mental and emotional health during plague times recognized the important connection between psychological well-being and physical resistance to disease. Communities developed various approaches to maintaining emotional balance and providing psychological support during these challenging periods. Meditation and contemplative practices became more widespread during plague times, as people sought ways to maintain inner peace and spiritual protection. Monastic traditions of quiet reflection were adapted for lay communities, with people spending regular time in silent contemplation or prayer. These practices provided both spiritual comfort and practical stress relief during uncertain times. Social support systems were strengthened and formalized to help community members cope with the psychological challenges of plague periods. Neighborhoods might organize regular gatherings where people could share concerns, offer mutual encouragement, and participate in collective activities that provided emotional relief while maintaining appropriate safety measures.